Okay, funding terrorist groups was always a matter of concern for Syria. Tens of terrorist groups spawned in the country in the past decade with different affiliations depending on who is supporting who. But most of the founders, supporters were from state actors, right? However, there were also non state actors who played a destructive role in Syria, and some of them funded these terrorist groups. And one of these actors is Lafarge, Lafarge, Lafarge. It is a French building materials manufacturer which pleaded guilty yesterday on Tuesday of providing material support and resources in northern Syria from 2013 to 2014 to ISIS and Al-Nusra Front, both designated on the UN list of foreign terrorist organizations. Now, this company stood in front of a court, and it's in the United States. And according to the court, which fined the French company $777 million, Lafarge schemed to pay ISIS and Al-Nusra Front in exchange for permission to operate a cement plant in Syria from 2013 to 2014, which enabled Lafarge to generate approximately $70.3 million in revenue. So the company was paying these terrorist groups to safeguard its operations in Syria, and in exchange, it was making tens of millions of dollars, but also it was paying to ISIS and the Nusra Front for, as I mentioned, the safeguard of its operations, the safeguard of its employees, etc. there. Now, after the start of the CIA regime change war in 2011, Lafarge negotiated agreements to pay anti-government terrorist groups in Syria to protect its employees, to ensure continued operation of the cement plant in northern Syria, and to obtain economic advantage. This is very important. And to obtain economic advantage over their competitors in the Syrian cement market by asking ISIS to impose costs on the competitors selling Turkish cement imported into northern Syria, which was often sold more cheaply than cement produced by Lafarge. So basically, this company was paying ISIS and Al-Nusra Front, two terrorist organizations, to safeguard its manufacturers, the company. Two, it was paying ISIS and Al-Nusra Front in order to ask them that they would tax the other competitors in the same market so that their product would be sold more often in northern Syria illegally when the Syrian government has lost control over that area. So basically, ISIS was taxing the competitors in favor of Lafarge, and Lafarge was paying ISIS for that. That means Lafarge paid ISIS to take action against its competitors either by stopping the sale of competing imported Turkish cement in the areas under ISIS's control, or by imposing taxes on competing cement that would allow Lafarge to raise the prices at which it sold cement. Now, according to the court documents, Lafarge paid through intermediaries the equivalent of approximately $5.9 million to ISIS and Al-Nusra Fund, consisting of fixed monthly donation and at the same time part of its, I would say, a percentage from its sales to the market. So there was a fixed salary or donation and also a percentage from how much this company is selling to the market. Now, who are the intermediaries? This is an interesting question. I mean, there were people who played a negotiating role between Lafarge and ISIS and the Nusra Front. And as you may know, lots of times if you follow the media, the corporate media, there are the terrorist groups in Syria they dislike the ISIS and the Nusra Front, but also there are the moderate rebels, right? So they always draw this distinction. But one of the intermediaries was a person called Firas Utlas. And Firas Utlas, I will show you his Wikipedia page, which is here. So this is Firas Utlas. Firas Utlas is a rich Syrian businessman who deserted from the Syrian government with his brother, Manaf Tlas, who was a senior general in the Syrian army, and they both took refuge in France. Now, this is Firas Atlas, and this is Manaf Atlas. I will show you the portfolio of Manaf Atlas. So this is Manaf. He was a brigadier general of the Syrian Republican Guard and member of Bashar al-Assad's inner circle, who defected in 2012. He was the first Syrian Republican Guard commander to defect from the Syrian military and declare support for the opposition. So just for the context, um, Manaf, Manaf's and Firas's father, Mustafa, was the defense minister of Syria for a very long time under the leadership of Hafez al-Assad. But when Bashar came to power in a few years, he stepped aside and another person came in his place. And they were not happy about it. They were unhappy. So the opposition, when the so-called uprising started, they found it as an opportunity to turn against the Assad family because they were so influential, so rich, and they thought like they can rule Syria again. And the French intelligence, they played an instrumental role in um, taking Manaf class and Firas class outside the country. And they went later sometimes to Saudi Arabia and sometimes to France, but I think they're settled in France. And from there, they started to support the so-called revolution in Syria. And Firas Atlas, the businessman, he also funded the Free Syrian Army. So the guy who was an intermediary between ISIS and Lafarge was also sponsoring and funding the Free Syrian Army in Syria. So the question here is how how come Firas has connections or he knows people in ISIS, right? And because the Free Syrian Army also claims that they are not terrorist groups and they dislike the ISIS ideology and its rhetoric and its program, strategy, or whatever call it. How is it that one of the sponsors of the Free Syrian Army, who was paying millions of dollars to this group, he was also at the same time having connections to ISIS, and he was playing an intermediary role between the French company and ISIS? This is a big question mark. And I was reading the article today about this news on the BBC and the New York Times, and none of them mentioned the intermediary. None of them said that one of the intermediaries is Firas Atlas, and he was jailed, by the way, in the Emirates because of his, I think for a few years, 2 or 3 years, he was jailed because of these connections with ISIS in the Emirates. So it is mind-blowing that NATO calls the Free Syrian Army a moderate rebels, and they wanted to replace the Assad government with these so-called moderate rebels. And one of the sponsors of these so-called moderate rebels was also having very close ties to ISIS. And the bigger question here remains, Lafarge paid $777 million, and I wonder to who this company paid this money. To the American government? And I really don't understand the logic here. Why would the American government get all these fines from Lafarge? The operation of Lafarge was in Syria, and the damages that happened due to this operation was against on Syria and on the Syrian people. So who will compensate the Syrian people for this, who suffered under the ISIS rule? This is the biggest question mark that nobody wants to ask and nobody dares to ask in the mainstream media. And nobody also dares to mention now that one of the intermediaries of this deal between ISIS and the French company was actually a senior opposition figure, a moderate opposition figure who was sponsoring the Free Syrian Army. So this was a quick video. I wanted to cover this issue. Some of you are always asking me what's happening in Syria. This is news for you. And today, Hamas delegation visited Damascus, and I can assure you that a big portion of the Syrian people aren't happy and aren't even excited about Hamas's return to Syria for obvious reasons. But Assad received the delegation, and he will allow them to have offices with junior, I would say, officials in Damascus. And yeah, my opinion is I would never trust Hamas again, and I would never trust any organization that has an affiliation to the Muslim Brotherhood. But in Syria, maybe they have a different opinion and they have a different strategy. It's up to them. This is my personal opinion. Anyways, I've been your host, Keo Kalmasian of Syriana Analysis. If you like my content, please subscribe and hit the like button. And if you want to support my work, there are different means in the description below. And see you next time.